The silence in my apartment had a weight to it. It wasn't the peaceful, meditative silence of a library or a forest. It was the hollow, pressurized silence of a deep-sea trench. It pressed in on me, a constant reminder of the empty space in the chair opposite me, the cold side of the bed, the second coffee mug gathering dust in the cupboard. For 3 years, since I moved into this paper-walled box, that silence had been my most constant companion. My other companion was him. Cole, the man in 3B. I didn't know him, not really, but I knew the sound of his heavy work boots on the landing every morning at 6:15. I knew the low, rumbling bass of his music that vibrated through my floorboards on Saturday afternoons. Never loud enough to complain about, just present enough to feel. I knew the scent of sawdust and fresh-cut pine that sometimes drifted in through my open window when he was working on some project on his small balcony. He was a carpenter, a builder of things. He created. I curated. I was a graphic designer, spending my days moving pixels around a screen, creating a clean, sterile beauty that had no substance, no heft. He was substance. He was heft. From my window, I watched him. I watched him haul lumber from his truck, the muscles in his back and shoulders shifting under his worn flannel shirt. I watched him laugh with friends on his balcony, the sound rich and easy, a sound I couldn't remember how to make myself. He had a way of leaning against the railing, one hand hooked in his pocket, a picture of casual, unforced confidence that I both envied and desperately craved. I had constructed an entire persona for him based on these fragments. Cole, the quiet, capable, and devastatingly straight neighbor. Every friendly nod in the hallway was, in my overactive imagination, just neighborly politeness. Every brief smile was just a reflex. He was a fixed point of unattainable reality in my quiet, lonely universe. My life was a carefully curated collection of grays and muted blues. His was a chaotic symphony of sound and scent and texture. And I was content, or so I told myself, to simply exist on the periphery of it. Until the noise. It had been a purchase born of desperation and a late-night internet rabbit hole. A high-end percussive massager, advertised with sleek graphics of athletes rubbing it over their sculpted calves. For deep tissue relief, the website promised. I told myself it was for my perpetually tight shoulders, a sensible purchase for a man who spent 10 hours a day hunched over a computer. It arrived in a minimalist black box, feeling heavy and powerful in my hands. And for the first week, it was for my shoulders. It worked wonders, kneading out the knots of anxiety and stress that lived there. But the silence in the apartment had been particularly heavy that Tuesday night. The weight of it was suffocating. Loneliness is a physical thing. It settles in your bones, a deep, resonant ache that no amount of stretching can relieve. So, in a moment of what I could only describe as reckless despair, I decided to see if the deep tissue relief could be applied elsewhere. I started it on the lowest setting, a gentle thrumming. Promising. I nudged it higher. The thrumming became a determined pulse. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the sofa cushions, a faint blush creeping up my neck. Another notch. The pulse intensified, the motor whining with a new, more serious intent. It was working. It was definitely working. Lost in the moment, seeking a crescendo to break the crushing monotony of my evening, I pressed the button one more time, pushing it to its maximum setting. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The machine didn't just vibrate, it roared. It was a deep, guttural, mechanical growl that seemed to vibrate not just in my hand, but through the floor, up the walls, and into the very soul of the building. It sounded like a small, enraged lawnmower. It sounded like someone was trying to drill through a concrete wall with a blender. My eyes flew open in sheer panic. This wasn't sensual. This was industrial. I fumbled with the power button, but my hand was shaking so badly from the vibrations that I couldn't get a proper grip. The noise was relentless, a jackhammer of pure mortification. And then, a firm, solid knock echoed from my front door. My blood ran cold. The massager in my hand felt like a live grenade. I finally managed to hit the off button, plunging the room back into a silence that now felt accusatory. The knock came again, louder this time. 3 solid raps that brooked no argument. It had to be him. Cole. Of course it was him. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic counter-rhythm to the phantom vibrations still buzzing in my palm. I scrambled off the sofa, shoving the offending device under a cushion, my face burning with a shame so hot it felt like a fever. I smoothed down my t-shirt, ran a hand through my already messy hair, and took a deep, shuddering breath. I am a normal person doing normal things. I am a normal person who was tenderizing a steak with a power tool. My internal sarcasm was not helping. I opened the door a crack. He was standing there, just as I'd pictured him 1,000 times, only closer. So much closer. He was bigger than I realized, his frame filling the doorway. He wore a simple gray Henley that stretched across his chest, and his dark hair was slightly damp, as if from a recent shower. The scent of soap and something clean, like fresh linen, washed over me. His face was set in a neutral expression, but his eyes, a deep, clear hazel I'd only ever seen from a distance, were focused intently on mine. They weren't angry. They were curious. "Hey, Liam," he said. His voice was a low rumble, just like I'd heard through the floor, but without the filter of drywall and insulation, it vibrated right through me. "Cole. Hi." I squeaked, my voice an octave higher than usual. Sorry, was I being loud? A corner of his mouth twitched, the barest hint of a smile. That's one word for it. Sounded like you were trying to start a generator in here. Everything okay? Fine. Yes. Totally fine, I said, a little too quickly. Just a new kitchen appliance. It's got a bit of a kick. I was a terrible liar. My face felt like it was going to spontaneously combust. He didn't call me on it. He just tilted his head, his gaze drifting past me into the apartment. It was a look of calm, steady assessment. He wasn't judging me. He was diagnosing a problem. And I was the problem. My entire life was the problem. It went quiet, he observed. Did you get it sorted? Yep. All sorted. Turned it off, I said, my hand still resting on the doorknob. A clear, cowardly signal for him to leave. Please leave. Please let me die of shame in private. He didn't move. He just held my gaze for a long moment. It was an unnerving feeling, being seen so clearly. I felt transparent, my flimsy lie about a kitchen appliance dissolving under the quiet intensity of his stare. I was sure he could see everything. The loneliness, the desperation, the ridiculous, vibrating piece of plastic currently hidden under my sofa cushion. Then, he did something I never would have expected. He took a small step forward, causing me to instinctively step back into my apartment. He took it as an invitation. Mind if I take a look? He asked, but he was already over the threshold. Sometimes these things have a faulty bearing. It can be a fire hazard. His presence immediately changed the entire dynamic of my living room. The space, which had always felt cavernous and empty, suddenly felt small, charged with his energy. He moved with an economy of motion, his steps sure and quiet on the hardwood floor. He smelled of soap and sawdust, and something uniquely him, a warm, masculine scent that filled my lungs and short-circuited my brain. And then he turned to me, his expression still perfectly calm, and said the words that would undo me completely. "It's all right," he said, his voice softer now. "Whatever it is, I'll make it quiet." My mind went blank. All I could do was stand there, rooted to the spot by the door, and watch him. He wasn't looking for a faulty appliance. His eyes scanned the room with a slow, deliberate patience. He was looking for the source, for my shame, and I was going to let him find it. I was too paralyzed by a cocktail of fear and a strange, thrilling curiosity to do anything else. His gaze landed on the sofa, on the slightly misshapen lump in the cushion. A flicker of understanding, or maybe amusement, crossed his face. It was so subtle I might have imagined it. He walked over, his movements unhurried, and I felt a fresh wave of heat crawl up my neck. This is it. This is the moment he laughs, or recoils, or gives me a pitying look before backing out of my apartment forever, leaving me with a mortifying story that will haunt me until my lease is up. He reached down, not with a theatrical flourish, but with the simple, practical motion of a man picking up a tool. He lifted the cushion. There it was, lying on the fabric in all its sleek, black, phallic glory. The silence in the room stretched, becoming a tangible thing. I held my breath, waiting for the verdict. Cole picked it up. He turned it over in his hands, his large, calloused fingers looking shockingly out of place against the smooth silicone. He had a builder's hands, strong and capable, with clean, short-clipped nails and a faint tracery of old scars across his knuckles. He pressed the power button. The machine whirred to life on its lowest setting, a gentle, almost apologetic hum. He raised an eyebrow, then cycled through the settings, his expression one of professional concentration. When he hit the maximum setting, the demonic roar filled the room again, and he winced slightly, shutting it off immediately. "Okay," he said, his voice perfectly level. "I see the problem." He didn't laugh. He didn't smirk. He looked at me, and his eyes were not filled with ridicule, but with a kind of quiet empathy. It was so unexpected that it knocked the air from my lungs. I stammered, my brain failing to form a coherent sentence. "It's for my back." The lies sounded even feebler now. "Right?" he said, and the corner of his mouth twitched again. This time, it was definitely a smile. A small, private one. "Your back." He ran a thumb over the control panel. "The motor housing is loose. The vibration is resonating against the plastic casing. That's where the noise is coming from. Bad design." He was talking about it like it was a faulty drill. He was diagnosing my sex toy. The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the situation was so overwhelming that a strangled laugh escaped my lips. It was a hysterical, half-strangled sound. Cole's smile widened slightly. "You got a Phillips head screwdriver?" he asked. I just stared at him. Is this happening? Is my impossibly handsome, supposedly straight neighbor about to perform surgery on my vibrator in the middle of my living room? "In the junk drawer," I managed to say, pointing a shaky finger toward the kitchen. He nodded and walked into the small kitchen alcove. I watched him, my mind reeling. He moved with a familiar ease, as if he belonged there. He opened the drawer, rummaged for a moment, and came back with my cheap, multi-tool screwdriver. He sat on the edge of my coffee table, placing the massager carefully on the surface, and began to work. I sank onto the arm of the sofa, my legs suddenly unable to support me. I just watched him. The room was quiet except for the tiny, rhythmic clicks of the screwdriver and the sound of my own breathing, which was loud and ragged in my ears. I watched the way his brow furrowed in concentration. I watched the play of muscles in his forearm as he worked, the focused intensity in his eyes. He was completely absorbed in the task, treating this object of my profound humiliation with the same serious respect he might give a wobbly chair leg or a misaligned cabinet door. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The shame began to recede, replaced by a strange and powerful sense of awe. He wasn't mocking me. He wasn't disgusted. He was helping me. He had stepped across the threshold of my apartment and into my mess, and instead of running away, he had rolled up his sleeves and offered to fix it. My internal analysis went into overdrive. Every tiny action was a clue to be deciphered. The way he carefully laid the tiny screws on a napkin so they wouldn't get lost. The gentle way he handled the plastic casing. The fact that he hadn't made a single joke at my expense. My long-held assumption about him. Cole, the untouchable straight guy, was beginning to crumble, and I didn't know what to make of the pieces. Was this just an extreme form of neighborly kindness? Was he just a genuinely good person who helped people with their loud personal devices? Or was it something else? He worked in silence for several minutes. I traced the lines of his profile, the straight bridge of his nose, the firm set of his jaw, the faint stubble that shadowed his chin. I had watched this man from a distance for years, and now he was here, 3 feet away, disassembling my shame with his bare hands. The intimacy of it was staggering. It was more intimate than if we'd been in bed together. It was a raw, unfiltered exposure of my most private self. "There," he said, his voice startling me out of my reverie. He had reassembled the casing and was tightening the final screw. "That should do it." He picked it up and pressed the power button. He cycled through the settings again. The hum was still there, the powerful vibration still evident, but the deafening, rattling roar was gone. It was just a low, discreet thrum. He had muted my mortification. He had, as promised, made it quiet. He held it out to me. I took it, my fingers brushing against his. His skin was warm and slightly rough, and a jolt, sharp and electric, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. Our eyes met, and the air in the room suddenly grew thick, heavy with unspoken things. The pretense of the faulty appliance was gone. The reason for him being here was gone. There was just the two of us, the quiet hum of the machine in my hand, and a silence that was no longer empty, but charged with a terrifying and exhilarating potential. "Thank you," I whispered. The words felt inadequate. He didn't say, "You're welcome." He just kept looking at me, his hazel eyes searching my face. The playful glint was gone, replaced by something deeper, more serious. "You get lonely over here, Liam?" he asked, his voice low and soft. The question was so direct, so perceptive, it felt like a punch to the gut. It sliced through all my defenses, laying me bare. I couldn't lie. Not to him. Not now. I swallowed hard and gave a small, jerky nod. My throat felt tight, and I was afraid if I tried to speak, my voice would break. He nodded slowly, as if I had just confirmed something he already knew. He had seen it. All this time, I thought I was invisible, just the quiet guy in 3A, but he had seen me. He had heard my silence. "I get it," he said softly. "This place, the walls are thin." He didn't just mean the noise. He meant everything. He meant the nights he probably heard me pacing, the lonely meals for one, the suffocating quiet that radiated from my apartment like a cold spot. He had been listening. This was the moment of softness, the crack in the stoic facade I had built for him. He wasn't just a capable handyman. He was a man who understood loneliness. The realization settled over me, warm and comforting, chasing away the last of my shame. We were just two people in a poorly constructed building, trying to feel a little less alone. The air crackled. The silence was no longer awkward. It was a vessel, holding everything we weren't saying. He hadn't moved from his spot on the coffee table, and I was still perched on the arm of the sofa. The space between us was only a few feet, but it felt like a chasm. I wanted to cross it, but I was terrified. Years of telling myself he was unattainable had built a wall in my mind that felt impossible to scale. He was the one who broke the silence, his voice a low murmur that seemed to wrap around me. "You know," he started, his eyes never leaving mine, "there are quieter ways to get what you need." There it was, the tipping point. The subtext flung out into the open, lying there between us, undeniable. My heart hammered in my chest. This was no longer about a noisy motor. This was a direct, unambiguous challenge. My mind raced, searching for an escape route, a witty retort, a way to deflect and retreat back into my safe, lonely shell. But I found nothing. I was caught in his steady gaze, pinned by the honesty of the moment. He stood up slowly, erasing 2 feet of the distance between us. He was so close now I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I had to tilt my head back to look up at him. I could see the faint lines around his eyes, the individual whiskers of his 5 o'clock shadow. My breathing hitched. "Cole, I started, but my voice failed me. What could I possibly say? I thought you were straight. I've been pathetically pining for you for 3 years. He raised a hand, not to touch me, but just to hover in the air near my face, a gesture that was both a question and a calming command. "It's okay," he said again, his voice barely a whisper. "Just breathe." I did as he said, dragging in a shaky breath that smelled of him. His eyes dropped to my lips for a fraction of a second, and in that infinitesimal moment, the entire world tilted on its axis. The last piece of my carefully constructed reality, the one where I was alone and he was untouchable, shattered into a million pieces. He wasn't going to wait for me to say the right thing. He was an action-oriented man, a builder, and he was about to build something new, right here in the ruins of my quiet life. He leaned in, his movements slow, deliberate, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I was frozen, mesmerized. My entire being was focused on the closing distance between our lips. This was it, the breaking point, my own private, quiet, earth-shattering climax. His lips met mine. It wasn't a hard, demanding kiss. It was soft, questioning, and impossibly gentle. It was a kiss of profound relief. It tasted faintly of coffee and something uniquely Cole. His lips were firm but yielding, moving against mine with a slow, exploratory pressure. His hand, which had been hovering in the air, came to rest on the side of my neck, his thumb stroking softly against my pulse point, which was fluttering like a trapped bird. A sound escaped my throat, a small, wounded sigh of surrender. I had wanted this for so long, had replayed 1,000 versions of this moment in my mind, but none of them came close to the reality. The reality was a quiet Tuesday night, the hum of a repaired vibrator on the end table, and the solid, grounding presence of the man I had adored from afar. I leaned into him, my hand coming up to rest on his chest. I could feel the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart under my palm. a stark contrast to the frantic chaos of my own. The kiss deepened, his other arm wrapping around my waist, pulling me off the arm of the sofa and flush against him. He was so warm, so solid. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was floating, untethered. I felt anchored. He broke the kiss, but only to rest his forehead against mine. Our breath mingled in the small space between us. I kept my eyes closed, trying to commit every sensation to memory. The rough texture of his stubble against my skin, the comforting weight of his hand on my neck, the steady thrum of his heart against my palm. "Okay," he murmured, his voice thick. I opened my eyes. His were inches from mine, dark and serious, searching for an answer. I couldn't find my voice, so I just nodded, a wave of emotion so powerful it threatened to drown me. Then the fear crept in, the cold, familiar tendrils of anxiety snaking their way around my heart. The moment was too perfect, too fragile. He would pull away. He would regret this. This was a mistake, a moment of pity or curiosity. My overthinking brain, my oldest and worst enemy, was back online. I tensed, an involuntary, infinitesimal withdrawal. He felt it instantly. His perception was unnerving. He didn't pull away. Instead, his grip on my waist tightened slightly, a silent reassurance. He took my hand from his chest, his large fingers lacing through my smaller ones, a firm, definite connection. "I've wanted to do that for a while," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in my sea of panic. "Longer than you think." My breath caught. "But I thought you were." The word died on my lips. "Straight." The label felt stupid and flimsy now. A wry smile touched his lips. "I'm not loud about my life, Liam," he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "Doesn't mean I don't have one. Doesn't mean I haven't been watching you, too." Watching me. The word sent a tremor through me. All those times I had been looking out my window, I had been seen. The loneliness I thought was a one-way mirror was a window, and he had been looking right back. My carefully curated isolation was a shared experience. The internal test was raging. Could I believe him? Could I trust this sudden, radical shift in my reality? The fear of rejection was a deep, well-worn groove in my psyche. But the feel of his hand in mine, the warmth of his body, the sincerity in his eyes, they were a powerful counterargument. For once, I decided to ignore the frantic voice of doubt in my head. For once, I decided to trust the man standing in front of me. I squeezed his hand. A small, simple gesture that felt like the biggest decision of my life. He smiled, a real, genuine smile this time that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. The quiet, capable carpenter was replaced by someone warmer, more open. It was like watching the sun break through the clouds. "Good," he said simply. He didn't kiss me again. He just stood there with me, holding my hand, our foreheads still pressed together. We breathed in the same air, the silence in the room no longer hollow or oppressive, but full. It was full of unspoken history, of shared glances across a courtyard, of assumptions dismantled, of a future that had, in the span of 20 minutes, cracked wide open with possibility. He eventually pulled back, though he didn't let go of my hand. "It's late," he said, his gaze flicking toward the clock on the wall. "I should let you get some sleep." Panic flared again, hot and sharp. He was leaving. It was over. As if reading my mind, he squeezed my hand again. "How about you come over for coffee in the morning?" he asked. "Real coffee. At my place. Around 7. It wasn't a suggestion for a date. It was simpler and somehow more profound. It was an invitation. An invitation to cross the other threshold, to step into his space, to move beyond the shared wall that had separated us for so long. It was a conscious choice, an offer of a new beginning. "Okay," I said, my voice hoarse. "Yeah, I'd like that." He smiled again, that devastatingly warm smile. He finally let go of my hand, and the loss of contact was an immediate, physical ache. He walked to the door, turning back when he got there. "And Liam," he said. "Yeah. Leave the power tools alone for tonight," he said, a playful glint back in his eye. "Get some rest." And then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving me alone in my apartment. But I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The silence that settled back over the room was different. It was a peaceful, waiting silence. The weight was gone, replaced by a buzzing, hopeful energy that vibrated in my very bones. I walked over to the sofa and looked at the massager, still sitting on the end table. My former instrument of shame. Now, it was a ridiculous, beautiful monument to the night my life had quietly, irrevocably changed. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed, listening. I listened for the familiar sounds from 3B, the creak of floorboards, the rush of water through pipes. But now they weren't reminders of my loneliness. They were proof. Proof that he was real, that he was just a few feet away, and that in the morning, I would close that distance for good. I finally understood. Love wasn't always a symphony. It wasn't always a grand declaration or a bolt of lightning. Sometimes it was a quiet knock on the door. Sometimes it was a shared moment of absurd, hysterical humor. Sometimes it was a steady hand that reached into your mess and, instead of judging it, simply offered to make it quiet. And in that quiet, you could finally hear everything you'd been waiting for. In that quiet, I felt like I'd come home.